Adidas Power Soccer is a football game that was developed by Psygnosis and released for the PlayStation early in 1996. And primarily this game, even though it comes from a long line of soccer titles that were released on the PS1, but also was used as an advertisement product as part of a campaign used to promote many of the Adidas products that were being heavily promoted during that time period with different types of sports, personalities and other companies, especially with the likes of soccer players and so forth. So creating a game around those type of ideas and aesthetics proved to be a good selling point, because the one thing you'll know straight away is that when you're playing the game, during different points you will often see and hear of various advertisements and videos being played to promote at the time the Adidas Predator series of football boots, which in itself is a cool concept. And that was the one thing I even loved about the PlayStation. When you look back at even previous games, even actual soccer and even racing games and other types of games, even from the likes of Namco with Ridge Racer and so forth, when you're playing the games you would often see advertisement banners to promote other games that they'd been created, or some of their sponsors that had sponsored the games at the time. Like even in actual soccer, especially with the first game, if you look at that, you'll see banners where they're promoting Cadbury's chocolate bars like Time Out and Boost and Crunchy. So it was a pretty cool idea of what they were trying to do. And the one thing that I think is cool about it is that aside from the gameplay, visuals and sounds and aesthetics, by having those advertisements there, it gave a sense of realism, that it felt like that you were genuinely part of something that you would have been used to seeing on TV, or if you were actually at a football game, say in a stadium, or if you were going to a Premier League game in the 90s and so forth. So that in itself was a pretty cool idea. Now when we look at the gameplay from a typical gameplay standpoint, as it was an early soccer game, it comes from a long line of different types of games where they were going through a very experimental period, because again, a lot of these games were coming off the back of moving from both 2D visuals from the likes of the Sega Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo coming onto the PlayStation and Sega Saturn, trying to utilise 3D visuals and gameplay mechanics. So for many of these early adaptations and iterations, they played quite well but wouldn't have been well executed, again because they were trying out different ideas and they're trying to figure out what actually works. But the games still were heavily praised and did sell quite well, even though considering the types of reviews the games got in magazines, considering it maybe not be as well polished compared to some other soccer games that were currently out at the time. But there's still a nostalgic element about these type of soccer games that you really won't get anywhere else. And soccer games only really started to come into their own really in the late 97 and early 1998 with the likes of FIFA 98, Road to World Cup, and then later with the ISS Pro series from Konami. That's when soccer games really started to become more simulation and even more professionally developed, if you will. But it still doesn't take away from the nostalgic elements of the Adidas Power Soccer series, or even the actual soccer series that was also seen on the PlayStation. There is some pretty cool elements and fun to be had with these type of games, although I will admit they're not going to be considered as well put together or as well polished. But for early games, they definitely offer something that you don't get anywhere else. Yes, they can be frustrating and they can be downright annoying at times, but it's like anything else. If you put a bit of time into it, you will have a bit of fun once you get to figure out the control systems and you understand what works. With the likes of these games here, especially with this game and its later adaptation, Adidas Power Soccer International 97, which I first played on a demo way back years ago, and even though it was a struggle, but I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Now it was tricky and it was frustrating, but when you got the hang of it, I found myself playing that demo for ages, just really getting into it. Because the one good thing that these early games really done really well, aside from the gameplay, was the atmosphere, because it had all the crowd sounds, even the commentary, and it had a lot of cool effects and features that at the time just felt realistic in a lot of ways. But the gameplay, I will admit, would be questionable, but for early type of games you can't really complain, because for many of us to get the chance to play these type of games back in the day was just phenomenal anyway, like, because we were just still new to the concept of 3D gaming, so having the opportunity to play something like this was always going to be a bit of fun. And I know myself that even when I was at school, when I was in secondary school at the time when the PlayStation was out, and there were many people, like even in the classroom, speaking of different types of games that they'd be playing, and funny enough, Adidas Power Soccer would come up in the conversation quite a bit, as quite a few guys that I knew had the game and they played it quite a bit, and they would talk about it quite often and thinking that they thought it was quite good and that they liked it, although they did admit that it was tricky. But there's just something about it, I think it's, even though it's not really considered to be realistic, it's got more of like a cartoony style element. I think that's what kind of makes it more fun, aside from whatever else it's trying to do. Now it is tough because the computer AI can be quite clunky and a bit lackluster in some cases, even with the likes of the keepers. The keeper can almost save everything that you throw at it, which can lead to the frustration. But I did find a good trick, and I'm sure a few people know about it at this stage, that when you're playing the game, if you're within the halfway mark or just over the halfway line, if you hold back on the whatever side you're on, if you hold the back button on the direction pad, if you're shooting right, you hold the left button while you're hitting the shoot button, and the player will automatically lob the ball. And there's a very good chance, because I used to do this all the time in that Adidas Power Soccer demo, where you used to be able to lob the ball, and chances are 9 times out of 10 you would stick the ball in the back of net, whereas it was easier to score goals that way than it would be trying to do it normally. You'd always lose nearly all the time, and that was the fun of it. You were always trying to see if you could just lob the keeper. To do it that way was just so much fun. That was, for me, was the best thing of it. When you seen the ball going up in the air, it sounded like, or felt like it was going in slow motion, and when you seen it and then eventually came down, you hear the crowd screaming when you'd scored, you'd be all ecstatic. You'd be like, whoa, I scored. So it'd be just so much fun. And like, even to play it with mates, like, truthfully, if you were to do it in terms of a technical standpoint, if you were trying to play like with skills, like, you may as well throw that out the window with this game, because even though you can perform tricks and do various nice little abilities and stuff, you're never going to beat people hands down by dribbling the ball around them or trying to run past them. That's not what this game really is about. You're never going to do that. Literally, a lot of the time, all you're going to do is just hit the ball, run after it, and hope for the best. And a lot of the times, the only way you can really take the ball off them is to literally take the legs of them and just slide tackle or do a 2-footed tackle into them to get the ball off them. It's the only way that 9 times out of 10 you're going to get the ball off them. And even with playing this game here, as I was recording this video, I was actually having a blast playing it. Like, I was losing the whole time, and then I gradually started to get back into it once I figured out to do the trick, because it's one of those things when you're trying to lob the ball, it doesn't always work first off. You have to keep trying it. And eventually, when I got myself back into it and I eventually started winning, only to realise then, I was like, oh no, what did I just do? I ended up scoring and getting back and winning 3-2, and then I go to try and get greedy and do the same thing again. But this is the problem with it, because it's so finicky when you're trying to lob the ball, that if you try to do it too many times, there's a chance what the player will do is he'll turn around and kick the ball in the opposite direction. And that's exactly what happened. And what ends up happening, I end up scoring an own goal. He stuck it in the back of his own net. So literally, from the look and the reaction of the crowd, as you can see here on the screen, that's exactly the way I was feeling. I was like, of course, then I just started going bananas. I was like giving out. I was like, if I wanted to do that, it wouldn't do it. So I suppose a bookman should never blame his tools. But yeah, just when I think about it, at the time I was kind of like, I was nearly pulling my hair out. I was just like, I can't believe this is happening again. This used to happen to me years ago when I used to play the game as well, and the fact is that it's happening now, and I'm just like, oh my god, here we go again. But I suppose that's just the fun of it. That's what I love about these old type of games. It's just, if you wanted to take them seriously, these aren't the games for that. These games are really just based around fun, because they're never going to beat the likes of FIFA and ISS Pro in terms of their technicality or playability features, because they're more simulation focused. Now, they're fantastic games in their own right, but these older games didn't aspire to that, because again, they were trying out new ideas and trying out different things. So it is what it is at the end of the day, and really it's up to the player whether they're going to get something out of it or not. And for me personally, I love these old type of games. I just love the quirky nature of them. Yes, they're difficult to control and they can be frustrating, but when you get into them and you get used to the mechanics and the ideas behind the games, you will actually have a lot of fun. They just genuinely are fun old school games to play. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are of Adidas Power Soccer, if you have played it yourself, and if so, what do you think of it? Do you enjoy these old type of soccer games on the PlayStation, or do you find them sometimes frustrating as well? I would love to hear whatever thought you have of this game, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And in the meantime, if you want to see more content around other type of soccer games that were also released on the PlayStation, then be sure to check out the playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.